Hello, my name is Bill Dempster with 360 Public Affairs, and I am thrilled to be moderating the third in a webinar series that is being hosted by CanCertainty. This one is on QALYs, quality adjusted life years. What are they, and how do they impact patient access to new cancer medicines? This is a webinar that is the third in a series. I'd like to pass it over to co-founder of CanCertainty, Bob Bick, to help position what we're doing on QALYs today in the broader educational series that CanCertainty is running. Bob, do you want to give us a quick update? And then I'll introduce the panel and the topic.
Sure. Thanks, Bill. Okay. Well, thank you, everyone, for taking the time this afternoon to participate in this latest installment of our Hot Topics webinar series. Now, just a reminder, these efforts are not just about developing a greater understanding of these various important issues that impact access. CanCertainty, with many of the other cancer-focused patient groups in Canada, have other efforts underway that are building on these webinars to create a broader consensus to fix and adapt the HTA and reimbursement systems in Canada to improve access to oncology medicines. Now, I want to remind everyone that that recordings of our previous webinars can be found on our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/@CanCertainty, and our slides will be available for this one and our previous and future ones on slideshare.net/CanCertainty. Just to remind everyone, in November, we did a webinar regarding PCPA and provincial listings and time to patient. In December, we did one focused on the funding algorithms. Of course, today, as Bill mentioned, today's topic is QALYs. But I also want everyone to be aware that February, we're doing a topic on surrogate endpoints. So please stay tuned for that one. So Bill, back to you to introduce today's topic and to introduce the panelists.
Thanks so much, Bob, and we'll get there in just 1 second. I wanted to let people know just a few housekeeping items. This webinar is scheduled for an hour. Depending on how we do, if we solve the world's issues, we will end it early. We're going to try to aim for at least 15 minutes where we can pull up some of your comments and questions. Please feel free to use either the chat panel button or the Q&A button, and I'll keep an eye on what those panels are saying and do my best to get to those questions and answers and input. If you have a question that you want addressed to one of our panelists, please let me know who it is. And if we don't get to your question or your comment, please don't feel aggrieved. We will do our best to get back to you after the webinar. The other thing is, don't wait until the end to start engaging. Have at it as soon as we get started to make sure that you're capturing your thoughts on what our expert panelists are saying as they say it. So in terms of today's panel and just a little bit about the topic, the timelines for patient access to treatments are getting longer and longer. We covered that in the first webinar, as Bob said, in terms of the time it takes from Health Canada regulatory authorization to funded patient access on principally provincial formularies, although the federal non-insured health benefits plan is the better part of 1 million people for Indigenous Canadians, plus all the other federal plans. And they all cooperate in the Pan-Canadian Pharmaceutical Alliance, which operates to negotiate collectively on the listing terms. And we're going to explain a little bit more about how and why this very strange acronym called the Quality Adjusted Life Year is affecting or potentially affecting the timelines to getting those patients access to those medicines. You may recall that the timelines that we looked at were the better part of 2 years from Health Canada authorization to funded patient access on the federal and provincial formularies. Well, in late 2020, the Canadian Agency for Drugs and Technologies in Health started using reduced quality thresholds. And that was $50,000 for each quality adjusted life year for new cancer medicines, and that was down from thresholds that seemed to go up to 140,000. And what this did was it resulted in recommendations that were for price reductions, in some cases nearly 100%, and in several cases guidance that the medicine would never be cost effective at any price. And so for medicines that have been evaluated as saying that there is some clinical benefit here, the massive price discounts that would have been required to bring it into this $50,000 QALY threshold would make that almost a non-starter for many negotiations if that was the starting point. Fortunately, we're here with some folks who have done extensive writing, analysis, and just unpacking of the quality adjusted life year, how and where it's being used at CADTH. And we're going to discuss about not just CADTH, we can also talk about how INES uses cost benefit analysis and opportunity cost discussions in those recommendations too. Our expert panel, of course, we've got Bob Bick. He's been doing this with CanCertainty for more than 9 years, but decades of experience in reimbursement and market access, and helps clients strengthen their relationships with government and drug plans, et cetera. Prior to that, he was a senior manager of reimbursement and market access at Oxford Outcomes and VP of public affairs at World Health Advocacy. I used to know it as Ward Health Advocacy, Bob, but they played on that word, and I'm dating myself too. We've got Lindy Forte. She's lead of market access and pricing at Eversana, and she's been doing that since July of 2021. But she has been working in this sector for 24 years. And I have to update some of my bios too, Lindy. Some people are saying over 10 years, and I'm at over 20 years as well. Her focus is on strategic development of submission dossiers and finding novel solutions for access issues. And just a quick note, Lindy warned us earlier using some very technical terms that it can get very complicated in health economics, and you don't live every day into the nitty-gritty of the academia of those issues, but you do deal with the issue of QALYs every day. And so you are going to unpack and explain what a QALY is in general and how it's used. So thank you for that. Louise Binder doesn't really need an introduction to anybody. Lawyer and health advocate par excellence, and a health policy consultant currently with Savior Skin Foundation. Of course, I got to know her and know of her when you started your work, Louise, in the HIV community after your own diagnosis. And I knew you'd received an honorary doctorate of laws from Queen's, where I went to, so we had some common professors at Queen's Law. But I didn't know that you had the Order of Ontario, which is just awesome. So you don't wear that pin, but you could if you wanted to. So you probably have it behind you. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lindy to explain without any qualifications what a QALY is.
That is great. Thank you, Bill. And thank you to CanCertainty for inviting me to speak today. And also, Bill, thank you for the disclaimer. Yes, I did want to mention that I'm not a methodologist in the area of QALYs or ICERs, but I do work with them and the implications of them every day. So my talk today is going to be on QALYs. It's an introduction. What are they? How are they measured? And why are they used? So what is a QALY? A QALY stands for Quality Adjusted Life Year. The intent of a QALY is to be able to provide a generic measure of disease burden and to be able to measure that disease burden across different disorders. It includes both the quality and the quantity of the life. What does a QALY look like? If you look at this graphic, it's somewhat technical looking, but basically scores range between 0, which is death, and 1, which is perfect health. And it incorporates the lifespan as well, or the number of years of that life. So 1 QALY is equal to 1 year of perfect health. Half a QALY could be half a year of perfect health, or it could be 2 years of half health, or a really suboptimal, actually, frankly, poor life at 0.5. Next slide. So how is a QALY measured? I mentioned at the outset of the introduction that this is a highly technical science. There's a huge amount of literature around it, and I'm going to attempt to describe for you how the QALYs are generated. Basically, this involves first defining health states of interest within a disease or within a disorder, and then asking individuals to rate those health states based on their experience. Either they have the disease or disorder, or it could be healthy individuals who are asked to imagine how good or how poor that health is. There are a few different ways of measuring, and I thought I would share a couple of examples with you. So one is called a time trade-off, and this involves asking participants in the study, would you rather live 10 years with diabetes requiring multiple insulin injections daily, or would you rather have a shorter lifespan, 8 years, with perfect health? And I'm sure you can imagine how difficult it is to imagine what would be the better scenario. I think generally speaking, people probably want to live that longer life, even if they have some impairment of their life. Another method is called a visual analog scale. This one's a bit more simple. I think we're all accustomed to rating things on a scale of 0 to 10 or 0 to 100. In a visual analog scale, individuals are asked to rate similarly. Would you rather live 10 years with breast cancer, having 2 recurrences that require medication and multiple medical visits? Or would you prefer to live 8 years with perfect health? These are huge, big questions. We're not doing this every day in Canada, but there is an expectation on the part of the health technology assessment review organizations that we have conducted these studies, that they're conducted in Canadians, they're validated for each and every particular health condition that we're applying for funding with Catathenine S. And so there is a huge body of science that's built up around this. There's a lot of initiatives that are in place in order to answer the questions of the health technology assessment organizations. And as you'll see later in this talk, there's a lot of uncertainty associated with these. So we're doing our best, but this isn't perfect. It's far from perfect. Next slide. So why is the QALY used? Well, we're looking at QALYs trying to determine what is the value of the life, the extra life lived, and the quality of that life, so that we can look at the long-term value of health technologies. So instead of just looking at short-term affordability of a product and the impact of a product on a budget, we're trying to look at the long-term value. So how much extra clinical benefit is a product providing? What is the cost effectiveness? Is it an efficient use of the resources? Are there other benefits or disadvantages that the technology brings? And what are some of the contextual considerations around this? This particular graphic came from ICER, which is an organization in the US. I haven't properly acknowledged the graphic in the subheading there, but I wanted everybody to know that I didn't create this. This came from the organization called ICER. Next slide. And how is the QALY used in healthcare decisions? So we're looking at balancing the incremental benefit that a new technology brings versus the incremental cost. If you look at this pictorial, it gives you an idea of a patient journey with a disease. So if they start in almost perfect health on the left side of the graphic, you can see they're in almost perfect health for a period of time. That might be 10 years. And then something happens at 10 years. In the case of cancer, it could be a recurrence. So the individual's quality of life falls dramatically at that point. And they get some new treatment, they carry on at that level of quality of life until another certain point in time, and their quality of life falls again a little bit. And then they carry on until they die at that third level of quality of life health. And so in the blue section, this is, you could think of this as the current standard of care. When we apply to CADTH and ENES for funding, we're looking at what is the incremental benefit that the new technology brings. And that's reflected in this beige section B. So the new technology brings a higher level of quality of health. It also brings longer life. So death comes at a later period. So the benefit under that graph is quantified versus the cost. If you look at the next slide, what's required is we create a ratio of the difference in cost between the new technology and the old technology versus the additional quality of life gain that the new technology brings over the current standard of care. And just to put this in context, some of the results of these analyses may look like the incremental cost of new intervention A in a rare disease is $1 million per QALY versus no treatment. Because in rare disease, often the new treatments are first in class. There's nothing really available to treat the underlying cause of the disease. Another result could be the incremental cost of new intervention B in breast cancer is $155,000 per QALY versus the current standard of care. There might already be a treatment available, but this new treatment brings longer life and a better life. One thing to note is that the typical ICER's incremental cost effectiveness ratios in Canada are far in excess of CADTH's threshold for cost effectiveness, which is set at an arbitrary figure of $50,000 per QALY. Next slide. So we have all of the science that has been developed in order to attempt to evaluate certain technologies over the current standards of care. But the system definitely isn't perfect. It's complicated, and there are a number of criticisms that have been leveled against this science. First and foremost, QALYs are subjective, so it depends who you ask. When I talked about the methodology, there's some studies that investigate determining the QALYs in patients with the disorder, and others look at healthy volunteers. And you can imagine that the results would be different depending on who you ask. One thing that's very important is the fact that people with cancer or rare disease can't achieve high QALYs. There's almost a bias against them because there is disability, there's shorter lifespan associated with the new treatments that become available. And because of those, because the QALY gain is smaller, they generate very high ICERs. And if you remember that equation where we have the difference in cost over the difference in QALYs, if you remember from math, if the denominator is very, very small, you're going to see a very high number in the result. This science of QALYs and ICERs is not patient-focused, so it doesn't consider all of the positive attributes of a new treatment, and some have called it dehumanizing. And finally, ICER thresholds for funding are set too low. It's subjective. They're set at $50,000 per QALY. Different countries are using different numbers. There's really no rhyme or reason to this $50,000. And that's my presentation. And oh, Bill, you're on mute.
Thanks so much, Lindy. We're going to get into some questions and some chat. Again, encouraging people to weigh in early. One that I'm going to keep in mind for when we get to that part is a population health perspective versus, what an individual might consider important for quality of life. But we'll get back to that in a second. Louise, you've done some quantitative analysis of how and where these are being used at CADTH. So looking forward to you walking us through the data and your comments on the QALY.
Thanks very much. excuse me, I started sneezing and coughing yesterday, so my throat is a little scratchier than usual. So I may take a drink of water here and there. I want to thank Bob and the rest of the CanCertainty gang for inviting me to present some of the analysis that we've done about QALYs in cancer and recent changes in policies in relation to QALYs. So I really want to thank Bob, and I want to thank all of you who are joining us from across the country, I'm guessing, to hear what we learned about QALYs in our work. So suddenly, the reason we kind of got into research, I'm more a health policy fan than I am a QALYs and quantitative research fan, but I did think that this was a very important piece of research to be doing. And I had a young medical student colleague who was prepared to do a lot of the cutting and pasting of the numbers and so on. So, so I want to thank him very much. Majd, when I see you, I'll thank you again. So there was a Current Oncology, a special edition of Current Oncology that allowed us to put in whatever presentation we thought might be interesting. And my young medical student colleague and I decided to put in a presentation on the issue of changes in policy as it relates to QALYs in cancer. So so that's sort of the beginning of this presentation. If you take a look, the words were kind of getting out early around, Bill, if you want to do the switching. So it was kind of being whispered around, you know, it's a small community, so we hear things pretty quickly. And it was starting to be whispered around late in 2020 that they were starting to see CADTH recommending the cost per QALY thresholds that Lindy has explained for oncology drugs with reference to $50,000 per QALY rather than the fairly commonly used $100,000, both in Canada and in a number of other countries. So, but it was just whispers. By 2021, it became clear from the recommendations that were coming out of CADTH in the on the oncology side that there had been a real policy shift, and that the few decisions that we'd seen in 2020 weren't individual or discrete to that particular file. It was clear now that the new rules were QALYs for oncology will be the same as for non-oncology at $50,000 per QALY. I'll just make one, I'd just like to have you keep one thing in mind in terms of process. And that is that CADTH has been deemed to be what's called a quasi-judicial body. Sorry about my dry lips that are making it hard. So this is a very important point, because if you are what is called a quasi-judicial body, if you are a body that's been set up by the government to do things in their place of a judicial nature, then you have certain responsibilities. And one of those is transparency with policies that you're making, consultation, public consultation, and the opportunity for people to make submissions and to hear what is being said and why the decisions are being taken as they are. So, I mention this because there was in fact no announcement officially that there had been a change in QALYs for oncology down to $50,000. And that may become important later if things stay kind of the way they are on the oncology side. There were requests made in 2021 to meet with some CADTH representatives, and those went unanswered. So we were kind of just stuck with it. There it is. And we really want to talk to you about it. It's pretty much what it was. So we decided, my colleague and I, that we would take a look at what was going on since this opaque change in QALY policy. So what we decided to do was to analyze all the CADTH oncology final recommendation reports from January 2020 to January 2022. And that turned out to be 56 analyzed recommendations. And then we tabulated the cost per QALY thresholds used in each recommendation. So that was the way we developed the article as to what were the implications of these changes. If one looks, as I said, the first analysis is January 2020 to September 2020. So we looked at the oncology drugs that were studied at that time through CADTH. And there you could see that up until that time in 2020, September 2020, there was a mix. You would see that there were inclusions of cost per QALYs at $100,000. There were some that recommended both, did an analysis of a recommendation at both $50,000 and at $100,000. And then there were some where there was no reference to a threshold value for that particular drug to the public taxpayers. So then we looked at the drugs that were analyzed post 2020, which, as I say, is when the whispers started that there'd been a change in policy. And we looked at all of the oncology drugs that went through to January 2022. And because it was at that point that the single cost per QALY threshold of $50,000 predominantly referred to in all final recommendations. So the red, you'll see all the red in our over here is down to $50,000 by September 20th. It's really moving in that direction to September 2022. So what are the potential implications of that change? We took a look at particular cancer drugs, and obviously we're not naming the drugs. A question of, I'm sure someone will shout that one out for me in a minute. So we obviously not wishing to appear to have any biases towards drugs, we've just given them numbers. But when we analyzed the implications of CADTH moving towards a $50,000 cost per QALY threshold for oncology drugs, we saw that this lower threshold resulted in recommendations to public payers for very, very high price reductions as a condition of reimbursement. So these three examples, as I say, 1, 2, and 3, are real cancer drugs. We just decided to save anonymity. One recommendation from CADTH was that there should be a 90% price reduction. The second drug recommended to PCPA that there should be a 93% recommendation. And the third cancer drug that we looked at said that there needed to be a 100% price reduction, and that even at that, it would not make it cost effective at $50,000. So to I think it was Bill's earlier point about uncertainty, or maybe it was you, Bob. One of the two of you mentioned uncertainties in marketplaces. This really creates profound uncertainty in marketplaces where policies are being changed at will. So some of the potential implications of this CADTH change for negotiations for cancer drugs, we still do have the Pan-Canadian Pharmaceutical Alliance. It's moved out to British Columbia, but it's still doing the same work. However, it has now become endorsed as a public body. And so that's a bit like CADTH, and we'll see what that means in terms of the way it does its work. Does it change anything about the processes or content? So there is, I think we really do need to be worried that drugs where there are just profound drops in price requested won't even end up in PCPA. They'll just drop the drug. Or PCPA negotiations may take much longer than they used to, which of course is a real access barrier for patients and should not be the solution here. Of course, there may be increased failures of negotiations, however long they negotiate. So so those are on the policy side, some of the serious policy issues. But also, I think there's another very serious policy issue that we see in the way CADTH made its decisions about dropping oncology QALYs pretty much overnight from $100,000 to $50,000. And that is the issue that I raised earlier about being a quasi-judicial body. Those bodies are supposed to be transparent. They're supposed to give people opportunities for input and for meaningful engagement. So if we allow CADTH quietly, and we quietly sit by and don't point out that they actually didn't follow the necessary processes for a quasi-judicial body, then this will be the another slippery slope, and heavens, don't we have enough of those already? So, so I think we have to really be watching this. This is quite a change in both process and in the methodology to come to that process. So, so that's, if you go to the next slide, that brings us to our discussions. Yes.
Thanks so much, Louise, for bringing forward some of the data and the time points. Bob, over to you to just provide your top level thoughts on Lindy's explanation of what the QALY is and Louise's review of how it's being used on specific medicines. And you've watched this as close as anybody. Working with your organization. So what do you think about this this QALY development?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, I worry that this might have the same impact as what we were worried about from the the proposed reforms to the PMPRB, that ultimately we're going to chill the environment where we'll see new products not being launched in Canada, and we'll see products that are available elsewhere in the world not available in Canada. I think it's important to note, however, that the QALY does not impact the health technology assessment in the sense that the clinical review. Although, Bill, I know that earlier today you had mentioned that there is some research out there that actually suggests that a QALY might actually have an impact on the clinical. But right now this seems to be positioned as a cudgel. CADTH equipping PCPA with a really big hammer to do arm twisting at the PCPA table. But my big concern, I want to ask Lindy this, is that it's pretty clear that QALYs are not sensitive to rarity of disease, and they're not sensitive to opportunities to significantly alter a disease. Is there other mechanisms that should be used or should be considered in the Canadian context to address these things, particularly rarity, as well as massive change to the disease.
Yeah, I think we could learn from examples in other countries. For example, in the UK, they have a policy of funding all cancer medications, irrespective of what the QALYs show. And in the US, I think it's the Medicare program that says they are not using QALYs. They've outlawed them or made them somewhat illegal. And then instead of using a QALY, they're using something called an equivalent value life years gained. So they're saying that all life years gained should be treated equally, and a gain is a gain. And so I think that sets a bit more of a level playing field. In Germany, all drugs offering clinical benefit are funded. They're funded for the first year at whatever price the manufacturer wants to charge. And then there's an assessment of how much incremental benefit that brings, and therefore how much incremental price could be charged. So I think what we could do is look at some sort of mechanism where we fund all drugs that have been approved by Health Canada and work on what is the right price according to the budgets that are available, and the incremental gains that those products bring. And potentially there could be a panel of clinicians. We work with clinicians every day. We know that they don't want to see funding of medications that don't work. They're very good judicious utilizers of new health technologies. So I think we have to put more trust in the system that Health Canada reviews drugs, they are effective and they work, and that clinicians will use them appropriately. And the decision should be more budget-based and not based on an arbitrary ICER and arbitrary QALYs.
It's a great question, Bob. I'm going to bring one back to you to try to make a link potentially with one of the other topics that we've been reviewing, and that's non-traditional endpoints. And Lindy or Louise, please jump in as well. When you have different endpoints than ones that are normally used to review for clinical effectiveness, maybe at earlier stages of cancer, or coming out with just phase 2 data, not phase 3 randomized clinical trials, they could, a review body could say that the uncertainty is much higher in terms of the potential clinical benefits. I'm just wondering if for some of these drugs that are coming out with 93 to 100% price reductions, if that's at all related to the types of evidence that they're looking at, and they're simply not considering or not they're not rating as high in terms of quality to be able to use to determine or to bring into that quality calculation. What is the relationship between the clinical effectiveness data and the QALY that may be particularly hard in cancer medicines with some of these changing endpoints and earlier phases of cancer? So that's a tough question. I don't know who wants to try to jump on that, if either of you or all of you want to jump in there.
I can give it a shot. So
Thank you.
so yes, the ICER, those high ICERs that go beyond the $50,000 threshold and are resulting in recommendations for 93, 97% price reductions are really driven by, well, two things: the high cost of the drug or the low quality gains. And as I mentioned in my presentation, in cancer in particular, because the additional lifespan gained, which could be impacted by adverse effects, fatigue, etc., that all go into resulting in the low QALYs, which give you a very high ICER. it's disadvantageous in the area of oncology, and it's also disadvantageous, we've seen, when you have a new technology that is introduced. There's a small incremental gain. We know that the new products are more efficacious than the products on the market in most cases, and that's how they're getting to market. But because it's a small incremental gain, it results in a high ICER. And so there's some flaws in our system. The system, the idea behind the system is great, that it's meant to be a general assessment. You can compare diabetes to cancer, a rare disease to an infection. But in practice, it's very challenging to get to what I would call the right answer.
Lindy, Deb on the line has a really interesting question that goes to that. If we're looking primarily at a new medicine and applying a quality to that, how about the other potential interventions, surgery, radiation, even diagnostics? Does the system use QALYs to look at those as well and put it through the same ringer as it does for new medicines?
To my knowledge, they don't. And when we're submitting new drugs to CADTH and ENEST, typically our comparisons are to the existing medications. Surgery, radiation comes into the pharmacoeconomic evaluation, especially if patients are having those concurrently. But we don't have to, when there's radiation and surgical decisions that are being made, they're not subject to the same analysis, and the decision makers are different. I think they're more located in the hospitals or in a healthcare region, and so there is a great deal of scrutiny on the cost of medications and the incremental benefits that they bring. And there was a question in the chat around, why isn't the QALY increasing when we have inflation? The costs of everything is going up. Healthcare personnel, it stands to reason that prices should increase, the QALY should increase. But in healthcare, especially in drug delivery, that's the only sector of the economy that I know about where we're not allowed to increase the price. There's many ministries of health and drug plans that don't allow any price increases whatsoever. So products that were introduced to the market 10 years ago are still reimbursed at that same price. Meanwhile, the cost of everything required to bring them to the market has gone up.
Thanks. You know what, reading the chat and listening to this, we're getting a lot of ideas for future webinars and discussions, Bob. So as you can probably see, because you can read too, I think, Louise, you really hit on something for one of our delegates. Dale is asking, how do we change the culture at CADTH so that it's recognized as a de facto price setter, as opposed to just what it says as being a price recommending body, as opposed to a price setting body? Is there something there in terms of its actual influence on a policy decision to list or not list versus a recommendation, which is what they say? Have you given some thought to that?
Yeah, I've thought about it actually quite a bit. It's a very difficult situation, because what one has had in the past, we'll see what happens with our new 10-year health plan going forward across the country. But I mean, it's very hard to tell really about price setting. And what worries me very much is that we seem to put everything one size fits all. And, even within rare diseases, we know, I mean, have to be dealt with in their own way, right? But even if you take a drug that's first in class and it's for an unmet medical need for someone who has a very serious illness or life-threatening illness, is that the same QALY I mean, you know, as we're going to have for a drug there are a few on the market, it'd be great to have this one, but you know, the world won't fall apart. So, I mean, because I don't think we look at the right things at all. We seem to take a one size fits all, you know, look at QALYs, and you just simply can't do that. And so until we get with the technology, because technology has changed so much. And I was just reading about AI, using AI to do your HTA QALY, you know, results. I mean, we really have got to get with the program here. And I just don't think that we ever have tried to do that as an HTA body, non-Quebec. Quebec can speak for itself, but for the rest, there's nobody innovating at all in this area. So I think that puts us so far behind, and just going back and trying to put a band-aid on all the same things. We need a different way of budgeting health budgets so that we stop saying it's 6% for drugs and 10% for hospitals and 25% for this. And what you really do is value-based healthcare, where you say, okay, what does this population need in order to stay healthy? Whether it's drugs or time in hospital or physiotherapy or whatever it is, and you bundle it up. And that's the funding for that health budget. And the other thing that they're starting to talk about now for the first time without, you know, laughing, is all the other conditions around you, like homelessness and the cost of food and so on. As, you know, looking at those in balance, as where do they fit in the health balance? And I think these things are very important. And we're so lacking in nuance in the way we look at the diseases, the unmet needs, populations impacted. There's so many things, and we just don't, there's no nuance anywhere in this, and you can't do that for people. People need different drugs, even though they have the same disease. We are not all the same.
Yeah, thanks, Louise. That's and you mentioned that, you know, other jurisdictions are doing things differently, and that's come up in our, and you mentioned Germany briefly, Lindy. We actually discussed that in another call a few weeks ago, and it sounds like Germany's moving from 1 year down to 6 months if it hasn't already. Okay. So that's news from overseas in terms of how they're approaching it. Quebec, I find it a little bit interesting. They, instead of actually coming out with a price recommendation reduction, they will say, the choice of funding this medicine for the budget impact that it would have in Quebec, you could hire this many nurses, or it could also fund this many, you know, surgical platforms or surgeries in another area. So the general concept of equality, as I understand it, is to be able to, you know, consider the opportunity cost of this incremental investment. But there are other ways to actually present it rather than just a straight price decrease that that CADAT has been doing using a $50,000 cost per QALY. You know, Lindy, after listening to Louise about the potential implications of this, have you seen or heard anecdotally, and maybe Bob, you want to jump in too, how is this translating at the negotiation table in PCPA? Are you at all in a position to talk about in general how PCPA may actually be using this or not?
Oh, I can say without telling any secrets I'm not allowed to tell, the recommendation for the price reduction is absolutely used at the PCPA table. And, you know, I've been involved in situations where there are scenario analyses that are run by the CADAT review team. They take the manufacturer's submission and they have the ability to adjust the inputs. And there was one situation where an input was adjusted and it didn't make clinical sense. And the manufacturer we worked with went to the clinicians and said, well, does this make sense? Do you see this with your patients? And they said, absolutely not. That's not an appropriate input. So, and the result was it pulled the ICER way up, well beyond the $50,000 threshold. And then, of course, at the PCPA table, the request for a price reduction was there, whereas the submitted base case showed that the product was cost effective. So we do see that the PCPA negotiators are using the results of the CADTH reanalyses or the results of the manufacturer's base case submission to detrimental impact. We heard of one situation, I wasn't personally involved, but there was a product that didn't even get to the PCPA negotiation table because the CADTH recommendation came out with a very, very high price reduction. And the manufacturer, headquartered in another country, said, we can't take the risk for the other countries. Canada's a small market, and they pulled out and they closed their office. And this is really shameful because now this was a medication that CADTH deemed clinically effective, and now patients in Canada won't have access to it.
And therein, of course, is what we're all here for today, right? Is that how does this threshold, this arbitrarily selected threshold, actually impact access? And that's a case study right there in denied access to an opportunity for better health and for longer outcomes. Because I mean, some of this was academic going back October 2020 when they all of a sudden introduced this, which is will we actually see drugs no longer be available? And now obviously that is the case. So I think it's incumbent upon patient advocates now, like we can't be seen as trying to advocate for higher prices. That's not what it's all about, right? That's certainly not what this should be interpreted as. What we're trying to ensure is that different diseases and different disease states should be treated differently. That just having one threshold is not appropriate because it's not sensitive to all the things we've talked about today. Which so I think when we're taking this forward in advocacy, that's the real statement, right? It's not about higher, that we're trying to advocate for higher prices. We're trying to advocate for those patients where this does not fit properly.
Thanks very much, Bob. Have you seen some of what Lindy is talking about as well in terms of tougher or longer negotiations based on some of the quality thresholds and price reductions that have been demanded in the recommendations?
Well, I am aware, as Lindy pointed out, that there has been a couple situations where there has been no finalized negotiation where there is not going to be a patient access. And I've also been aware of lengthy, protracted negotiations where it's been very difficult, to come to negotiations. So, that is also a problem for patients, right? A delay in access. But there's also been odd cases too, where there's been, extremely, like a requirement for a price reduction, I believe, of either 93 or 97% for a drug combination. I noticed that somebody in the chats where was asking whether or not there was combination therapies are included in this as well, and I'm aware of one of them. But oddly, that one that had a very high requirement for a price reduction, and it was a combination therapy. They concluded successfully in negotiation very, very quickly. So the data don't support conclusions in all areas right now, but I think we certainly have seen some drugs no longer becoming, or drugs not accessible, which is the most concerning case.
Thanks, Bob. And Louise, I've seen this discussion come up, and you've had the courage to actually call out some of the leading economists in the country around the quality to have a discussion on this in a pretty public plenary fashion, where CADTH is present and others are present to talk about why 50,000. And what I recall hearing is two things. One, we want to be able to look at all interventions using the same threshold, so it's an apples to apples consideration. So that's a little bit of an answer to what you were saying, Bob, about treating things differently. And we've talked about why potentially in terms of the types of clinical evidence that come in cancer and maybe patient preferences or citizen preferences around cancer. We haven't talked about that even though we're talking mainly about cancer. We can if we need to. The other point that's come up is the opportunity cost of somebody else getting that $50,000 investment to access another bit of quality of life. And how do we consider that the unseen patient and that opportunity cost? Is that a valid issue or concern from your perspective, Louise? And is there a way to actually address it beyond just coming up with a new formula for QALY saying 100,000 now?
Well, I mean, again, we have to look at the populations we're dealing with. If you're dealing with a disease for a population where they're a very serious life-threatening illness, and this is a first-in-class drug, or combination of drugs, I mean, that's a very different situation. You have to look at that very differently. With one thing I notice is there's never an ethical lens put over these decisions. I haven't seen an ethicist on any of the committees of any of the federal and pan-Canadian bodies. And I can't understand how you can be talking about opportunity costs between a drug that's going to save someone's life where there's no other drug, there's nothing else available, to, they're supposed to duke it out with somebody who has, arthritis. I don't, that's not the way we're supposed to be running, our healthcare system, which of course is why I believe in this concept of bundling what people need. And then you're not fighting about, the arthritis drug versus the oncology drug. You put the bundle together of what that population needs for good health.
And that's something that we need to keep an eye on for this year. And I really like that alternative approach or considerations idea, Louise. I know you've been involved in helping bring the concept of value-based healthcare to Canada. I remember seeing you in the US at one of the ICHOM conferences and what Save Your Skin and All Can are trying to do in cancer in particular. It just seems like the time is right for new ways to look at these issues. So have some ethical perspectives and not just the supply side classic economic perspectives on these recommendations. What I'm doing my best to summarize where you started, Louise, in terms of give people a heads up and consult on policy changes in advance of implementing them. Let's have more conversations and discussions like the ones that we're having today. We have just a couple minutes left, so 30 seconds to each of you. What do you want people to walk away with? If you can handle that in 30 seconds each. Who wants to go first?
Well, I think I'm just going to reiterate that, from a positioning perspective for patient groups, especially, this can't be about being perceived as arguing for higher prices. I know that we've been hit in the media a couple times in the past as patient groups, addressing the PMPRB reforms issue. We have to make sure that we're addressing things about rarity of disease or, high unmet need when we're talking about QALYs. And so positioning to me is a very, very important part of this.
Thanks.
But I don't think we should ever, the one thing I always worry about, is that we should never be seen as pitting ourselves, one population of patients against another. My view is maybe everybody in the world doesn't get what they want, but they should at least be able to get what they need. And it must be true if Mick Jagger said it. So, I think that's the important thing. Like, everybody isn't the same, and we have to look, and an ethicist really needs to put an eye on those things too. It's a huge difference. And why can't we work QALYs out so that drugs could be accepted and available after phase 2 trials, and then you follow the data through the phase 3 trial, and if necessary, a phase 4 trial, or post-market surveillance. But why can't we do that? Why do people who need things after phase 2 and where the research is very strong, why can't we find out some formula to get those drugs to those people? Because they may not have time to wait. for the end of a, that's certainly what cancer patients are seeing. So why can't we work that out? I mean, we surely were bright enough, to be able to put good, smart minds together to figure that problem out. So my eyes glaze over when I hear that from them. Well, we'd like to, but we don't know how to do it. Yeah, you do.
Yeah. Speaking of good, smart minds, Lindy, your 30 seconds.
Okay, a couple of things building on what Louise and Bob have said. I think there are innovative solutions out there. I think we need to find them. Other countries have. We want access for everyone to good quality medicines that have good quality evidence. And there's ways to get there. I think Hadith does an excellent job at reviewing the clinical evidence and putting that evidence in context and reaching out to clinicians who have experience with the condition and the medications. And so that part of the process is working very well. I think the other part of it, the economic review, 97% price reductions are not sustainable. How can a manufacturer bring a product to market and only get 3%? So I think we need to find more innovative ways of making sure we can bring new products to market for all Canadians.
Excellent. That's great. Well said. I'm going to quickly share screen one last time to remind people that the next webinar is on February 21st. We've got Bob again, of course, as the campaign co-lead at CanCertainty, Christian Thorland, senior strategic advisor at Cytel, and then bringing back the band, hopefully, Tara Bourgoin is going to be able to join us with some data on the issue of surrogate or non-traditional endpoints, which we hinted at today. I neglected at the beginning to thank some of the supporters of this webinar series, specifically AbbVie, Amgen, Merck, and Pfizer. So thank you for making this possible to those organizations. I hope I can see many of the people on the line on February 21st. This webinar, in terms of the video, will be up on the YouTube channel. Everyone who signed up is going to get a thank you email with the link to that, as well as CanCertainty's SlideShare channel. And last but not least, I just have to thank so much Louise, Bob, and Lindy for helping unpack and explain what is a pretty dense, challenging issue for people to understand. I'm hoping that we've made some headway on that. If we do send out a note, we may actually send it with a poll. Do you understand QALYs a bit more than you did before you watched the webinar? So let's see if how we did in terms of the ratings of people who participated. In the meantime, thank you so much again for participating and bringing your expertise forward. We'll see you in a few weeks. Happy almost February. Happy New Year, everyone, because it is still January. I hope you're well. Take care. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.